Like most of you who will see this, I watched Kamala Harris's acceptance speech as the Democratic Party's nominee in the 2024 election, and it was pretty awful. I'll play a few clips from it and then I'll break it down.
On behalf of my mother and everyone who has ever set out on their own unlikely journey, on behalf of Americans like the people I grew up with, people who work hard, chase their dreams, and look out for one another, on behalf of everyone whose story could only be written in the greatest nation on earth, I accept your nomination to be President of the United States of America. And let me say, I know there are people of various political views watching tonight, and I want you to know, I promise to be a president for all Americans. You can always trust me to put country above party and self, to hold sacred America's fundamental principles, from the rule of law to free and fair elections to the peaceful transfer of power. In many ways, Donald Trump is an unserious man. But the consequences of putting Donald Trump back in the White House are extremely serious. Consider not only the chaos and calamity when he was in office, but also the gravity of what has happened since he lost the last election. Donald Trump tried to throw away your votes. When he failed, he sent an armed mob to the United States Capitol, where they assaulted law enforcement officers. When politicians in his own party begged him to call off the mob and send help, he did the opposite. He fanned the flames. And now, for an entirely different set of crimes, he was found guilty of fraud by a jury of everyday Americans and separately found liable for committing sexual abuse. And consider what he intends to do if we give him power again. Consider his explicit intent to set free violent extremists who assaulted those law enforcement officers at the Capitol. His explicit intent to jail journalists, political opponents, and anyone he sees as the enemy. His explicit intent to deploy our active duty military against our own citizens. Consider the power he will have, especially after the United States Supreme Court just ruled that he would be immune from criminal prosecution. Just imagine Donald Trump with no guardrails, and how he would use the immense powers of the presidency of the United States, not to improve your life, not to strengthen our national security, but to serve the only client he has ever had, himself. And we know what a second Trump term would look like. It's all laid out in Project 2025, written by his closest advisors, and its sum total is to pull our country back to the past. But America, we are not going back. when Donald Trump tried to cut Social Security and Medicare. We are not going back to when he tried to get rid of the Affordable Care Act, when insurance companies could deny people with pre-existing conditions. We are not going to let him eliminate the Department of Education that funds our public schools. With respect to the war in Gaza, President Biden and I are working around the clock because now is the time to get a hostage deal and a ceasefire deal done. Same time, what has happened in Gaza over the past 10 months is devastating. So many innocent lives lost. Desperate, hungry people fleeing for safety over and over again. The scale of suffering is heartbreaking. President Biden and I are working to end this war such that Israel is secure, the hostages are released, the suffering in Gaza ends, and the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, security, freedom, and self-determination.
The first issue I had with the speech was the amount of time that was spent talking about her past. Now, I'd like to believe that if someone wins an office, it's like a highlight of their career. You have a 50% chance of being the next president of the United States, next chief executive of your country, right? I get where it's this big moment of pride and excitement, etc. I understand, but you're giving a 40-minute speech, and for over 10 minutes, at least half of it, either of a quarter or half of it is spent on her mom and her background and what school she went to and the upbringing of her and her sister and these different people. And at a certain point, I just get annoyed because I don't think that much time should be spent on something like that. I believe most people are here to actually hear about what your policies are, and to devote so much time to this minute, irrelevant stuff is just ridiculous. But then we get into the Trump fear mongering. Trump in many ways is not a serious man, but if he takes office, he'll eliminate Head Start, and he'll try to have a nationwide ban on reproductive rights. And I thought to myself, okay, first of all, I have never once, and I follow Trump pretty regularly as someone that follows this stuff, I've never once seen Trump say anything about getting rid of Head Start. I looked it up after I watched this speech. I don't see anything in there. I know that Project 2025 has, some mention of wanting that, so maybe she's trying to say that he's going to do it if he takes office, but again, it's framed as though Trump has declared, if I'm reelected, I will get rid of Head Start. I have not seen any rumblings of him in terms of him wanting to do that. The only thing he said about education policy was getting rid of the education department, which he said when he ran in 2016, and still, after a full 4-year term, did not do. But when she mentions him favoring, or if he gets in office, there's going to be some ban on reproductive rights nationwide, I said, listen, if the Democrats were serious about this stuff, they would have codified Roe v. Wade when they had a supermajority under Obama. They chose not to, for whatever reason. And I can't see a scenario where after Roe v. Wade is overturned, we're suddenly going to see the pushback on these rights be reverted to where all the states that still have them, like California, New York, right? All of those are suddenly going to just not be able to do it anymore, or rather have their rights to do it somehow revoked through whatever a means that Harris cannot describe to us, whether it's the Supreme Court just making decisions for fun. But supposedly these blue states are going to have their rights taken away, and they're not going to have any ability to contest it, to argue it. Again, just total fear mongering. And she has about a 10-minute spiel about the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and having cleaner air, just blah, 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 blah. And really, what my problem with a lot of this stuff is that we talk about how we need policy specifics, right? So Republicans, when they attack Harris as this big, giant socialist, they'll actually mention, Green New Deal, free college, single payer. And, whether you're a fan of these ideas or not, and I am, at the very least, they are specific proposals. They're proposals that Harris has not indicated any actual support for, but there's still things that we can, type in, look up specifically, go through, see if we favor it or not. She just speaks in a lot of generalities about issues. And of course, my favorite part is when we get to her comments on Israel, and this is important because there's no other issue at this point that has people more divided. And really, it's not even a division. There is a consensus among voters that the way Palestinians are being treated is terrible. That the whole situation in Gaza, as committed by the Israeli government, is atrocious. And because Democrats and Republicans both get AIPAC money, so they have to support the Israeli government, they refuse to take a definitive position in favor of the Palestinians. So I said before, all Harris would have to do to shore up this pretty large segment of voters that are not seeming to go away or compromise at all would be to say, hey, you know what? Funding for Israel is over. We're not supplying them any more weapons. We're giving them nothing until they give the Palestinians an actual way of being treated in a humanitarian way. But she won't do that because the donors don't want her to. So instead, we hear this spiel about, I will always support Israel's rights to defend itself. And at the same time, we need to, be, again, trying to play middle of the road. And my biggest problem with politicians is that, and I've said this before, these people are supposed to be leaders. You're supposed to look at Harris sitting up there and believe this person is going to be the 47th president of the United States. This person is going to be leading the U.S. for at least 4 years, possibly 8 years. And she can't even take a definitive stance on one of the most important issues concerning this election cycle, which is the Israeli-Hamas war. Just pathetic, man. And it's very simple to see what I would have liked out of this speech. Again, you do your little thing of, my mother, my family, whatever. Do that in maybe speech is 40 minutes, maybe 5 minutes at max. And then you segue into talking about how as VP to Biden, you've had a lot of training in terms of getting ready for this position. You've been by his side with every major issue. Maybe you signal in what areas you're different. I mean, she had the goal to say that she was warning Zelensky about Putin, and she and Biden are working tirelessly to stop the issue. Repeating what AOC said earlier, it's like, who buys that? Who believes that? If you believe it, I have a bridge to sell you. But again, if she was delivering a speech that was actually worth listening to, little tiny segment on her family, and then segue into the years as VP, the stuff she wants to have a continuation of, why she thinks that Trump will be backwards in whatever way. And there's plenty of stuff to actually get Trump over, and we've addressed them before. But I'm not going to pretend that when Project 2025 says something, that's the same as Trump saying it. It's not. And look, I don't have some keen memory of every single acceptance speech, and of course, I would still say the AOC speech was worse. But this was pretty bad. I hope that in the next 2 to 3 months, as polls continue to diminish for either side, Harris will take more definitive positions. She'll give some damn interviews. Because after 40 minutes of watching her sit there and just kind of talking, and as Mark Levin said, likes to say, be surrounded by the clapping seals. I'm just not enthused for the rest of her candidacy. Um, I don't say this as some Trump loving, make America great again aficionado. It really is just a person that is left leaning, wanting some more left wing positions from the supposed left wing party of the United States. But it's just, like I defended her when they were talking about, oh, you weren't elected. It's like, well, I mean, hey, most Democrats didn't even vote in that primary, and a lot of us did not want Biden for another 4 years. So this was like the most compromising way of getting another person there. I just wish the new person would, in being 20 something years younger, at a minimum, try to actually hear out the voters. Like, hey, if you hear people saying that they want this conflict in Gaza to stop being supported by the U.S., actually do it. Actually meet them halfway. Don't do this middleman stuff. It's tacky. So yeah, this speech was pretty bad, and I apologize to anyone who had to watch the full thing. I saw it later on YouTube. I put it on fast mode. But if you have to sit there and watch that for 40 minutes, you have my condolences.